Another fine harvest, Log. You ought to be congratulated.
Hello there and welcome back to the channel. Today I have a bit of an unexpected video. I was in the middle of doing the second entry in the Backseat Adventure series, but when I got to the third game, Orion Burger, my notepad just filled up and I concluded that this was just too much to talk about for this kind of format, and I decided to do a separate video just for this game. Now I expect some controversy about this video because Orion Burger is a very well reviewed and liked game, I think, but to me it was an infuriating experience, so this video is going to be about the 7 deadly sins of adventure game design in Orion Burger. Now inventory puzzles and time limit go together like peanut butter and anchovies. Who doesn't have fond memories of the last 2 minutes of a surprise test at school when you have only managed to answer the first of 10 questions so far? A really exhilarating experience that you can relive in Orion Burger again and again. So let me give you some context. In Orion Burger you get abducted by these aliens that want to harvest the human race for producing burgers. But because of regulation they have to do a test on the human race before that to see if they are intelligent beings, because those are not allowed to be turned into junk food. But because something went wrong, you return to Earth 1 hour prior to your abduction. So this hour is your time limit before you get abducted again and then sent back to Earth again, and you have to redo the whole thing. So basically Groundhog Day but without Bill Murray. Now the good thing is that you have actually a button in the interface to speed up the time limit and get abducted again instantly, because if you have made all the preparations then you have to go through the test again and not fail it this time. But why on earth then have the time limit anyway if you can just trigger it from the menu? I mean, there is no narrative explanation for that UI, so I don't think you would need a narrative explanation why the time limit is more than an hour or even there at all. No, this seems like a mechanic that had been arbitrarily put into the game, like so many others we come to later, to lengthen the playtime of an otherwise quite short game. Now you could assume that an hour is quite a lot of time, but you have to consider that the longer this time limit is, the more you will get reset after you fail it. So even though on the second or maybe third time you won't take the whole hour to do the same things, there's a lot of progress that you will lose. So this time limit basically works like a checkpoint, which has its positive because, well, you will never lose more than that hour, but also it's very annoying if you run into it, and you will. Now dead man walking scenarios in adventure games refer to situations where you can't solve a puzzle because you have missed something beforehand. This can result in a lot of frustration because the game oftentimes doesn't tell you that you missed something and you try everything but you just can't continue and get frustrated. And on the other hand, then you have to reload an older save game, and especially the older Sierra games were infamous for situations where you could miss an item in the very first chapters of the game that you need at the very end, requiring you to play through the whole game again. For Orion Burger, dead man walking is actually part of the core gameplay. The game repeatedly throws you into a situation where you can't do anything but doesn't tell you, and you instantly have to go back to the last checkpoint to pick up an item that you will need in the future. And adding insult to injury, sometimes it's not only one item, so maybe you've tried everything, you can't continue, then well, you give up, you go back to the last checkpoint, and there you will find the item that finally will help you solve the puzzle, just so you have a puzzle right afterwards where you would need a second item that you could have never guessed at that point, and you don't need to go back again and now get both items, requiring 2 resets and a lot of wasted time. So many puzzles in this game come down to trial and error, and again I'm pretty sure that this is to artificially increase the playtime of the game. Now I could overlook this issue because, as I mentioned, many other adventure games are guilty of the same thing, but we are talking about a game from '96 when adventure genre tropes were pretty much defined, and the games from LucasArts showed how to create great and intricate puzzles without relying on dead man walking scenarios.
What's all the ruckus? Where's my cam? You don't have to knock the door off his hinges. Ah, good day to you, man. So what's it going to be? Parking tickets, taxes, property sales, marriage licenses, tourist information, zoning ordinances, survey records, or bagpipe repair.
Now going back an hour in a point-and-click adventure doesn't sound so bad. I mean, after all, you know what you have to do and you can just rush through it, right? Well, in theory you can. Wouldn't it have been for the unskippable dialogue and cutscenes in the game? And there's a lot of dialogue and many small animations, short cutscenes and extensive dialogue trees. So just for your quote-unquote game over cutscene when you get abducted again, you have to wait 2 minutes. Well, that doesn't sound too bad, but I promise you, after you've watched that cutscene for the 3rd time, it feels more like 2 hours. And some of those repetitions are completely unavoidable, because from the puzzle design you have to go back a few times. And the game forces you to watch the same dialogue for at least a 2nd time, if not 3, 4, 5 or even 6 times, depending on how well you progress through the puzzles. Now imagine being trapped in a cage with some bloodthirsty rodents armed with laser guns. What would be your first instinct to get out of this precarious situation? If your answer is repairing a broken pest dispenser, giving that to a kid that's fishing at the lake to learn he put some crickets in a freezer, which you then shoot with your photon gun while being on the lowest of 3 floors of the cage to then hide behind a giant hamster wheel and lure the rodents there, where they will try to shoot the free-roaming crickets, killing each other in the process, then you definitely have a more wild imagination than I do. That puzzle would make Ron Gilbert cry. You want that? What has the poor man done besides spoiling the secret of Monkey Island? At some point I thought I was just imagining things. I mean, this game had glowing reviews and many people really liked it, so maybe I'm just too stupid for the game. But then I looked up quite a few of playthroughs on YouTube and no, nobody was able to get through those puzzles without a walkthrough. You don't believe me? Okay, how about another example? You're trying to get rid of an old man on his private island. When even reading the solution to a puzzle in a walkthrough doesn't make any sense to you, then you know you're in for a wild ride. It starts innocent enough. You buy a deed for your own small island, which turns out to be not much more than a simple rock in the water. And when you read your deed, there's this very peculiar definition of which property now belongs to you, because it's the island that's just south of the most northern island of the lake. Now you could think that maybe you need to manipulate a compass or throw a big rock in the lake to create a new island that's even farther north. But no, you have to divert a truck that is carrying diapers to crash through a construction and land in the lake, and the diapers will soak up all the water, and then a completely invisible island to the north will appear, making the island of the old man now the property on your deed. Which is the perfect segue to our next sin. There are a few events in the game that are running on a fixed timer or maybe a random timer, I'm not quite sure about that. Anyway, it means there's a lot of waiting of stuff to happen. So that means for the aforementioned puzzle that you have to wait for the truck driver to crash into the construction site, and that can take quite a long time. There's no way to trigger the sequence manually, you just have to stand around or maybe walk between the screens and wait until it happens. Now remember, you have to do that every time you screw up, so this waiting time can add up quickly, talking about games respecting your time. But what can be even more infuriating is when you don't even know that these events might take place. So you're wandering around aimlessly, don't know what to do until something happens. And in the case of the truck driver, he can show up on multiple screens, but this is the only screen where you really have to interact with him. There's this whole scene where he arrives at Vera's diner and you can go inside and you can talk to him, you can wait for him to leave again, and he's leaving behind some money. So this really suggests that there's something that the game tries to tell you here, but no, there isn't. Which directly brings us to sin number 6. A red herring in an adventure game is an item, object, dialogue or interaction which doesn't help you progress the game or learn more about the game world, but instead distracts you from finding the right solutions. The red color signifies importance, but in reality is completely useless. So in this example, the money left by the trucker on the table, which you can't really interact or do anything with, but that's very prominent and has a lot of attention focused onto it. Now, these obvious red herrings are not that common in Orion Burger, but what you do have is a lot of object clutter. There are tons of interactable objects in every scene that don't have any purpose in the game, and I mean any purpose. Because oftentimes, yeah, you have an object that you can at least look at that contributes a bit to the scene and to the immersion, but in Orion Burger you oftentimes only get standard sentences when you look at those objects or try to interact with them, so they really don't add anything to the experience, other than convoluting the scenes you're in.
Doesn't look very important. Nothing remarkable about that. Nothing remarkable about that. Doesn't look very important. Nothing remarkable about that.
Another blatant example of how you can pad out the runtime of your game, but not a good one. Adding insult to injury, there's also a few occasions where you have to do real pixel hunting with having very small objects that you need to interact with that are easily overlooked. Just look at this screen. What do you think is the most important objects here? I'll give you a second. Obviously, those skin-colored gloves on the top of the shelf to the right. Now, it would be too easy and much too convenient if you only had to reload your checkpoints if you ran out of time or missed some items in the past. Of course, you can also die in Orion Burger if you don't react fast enough in several situations. Sure, you can be lucky and get some funny animation out of it, but is that really worth going back and rewatching all those unskippable dialogue? Not in my book. And a few of these situations are really hard to avoid if you don't know beforehand, so it's again down to trial and error, reload, retry, and waste more of the player's time. I know this video is a bit of a downer, but I hope it's still interesting or somewhat entertaining, so if you like it, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving the video a like, and maybe you want to check out my other videos as well on all the retro gaming goodness. Bonus round, if you're still awake. What for some reason is an absolute must-have for point-and-click adventure games? Mazes, of course. If you're creatively completely bankrupt and have no idea how to make your game longer, then add a maze. Now, all joking aside, there are a handful of pretty good mazes in some adventure games, but oftentimes they are just tedious, annoying, disorientating, and not a lot of fun to play through. In the case of Orion Burger, it's not the biggest offender because at least it's on the shorter side and not that difficult, but it's not very interesting as well. It's just a play of hot and cold where you repeatedly use the whistle and then your character remarks if you're getting closer or farther away from your goal. There's not much more to it, so let's turn down the heat and talk a bit in earnest about the game. Now, why did Orion Burger get me all riled up? Is it because it's the worst adventure game ever? No, definitely not. There are far worse offenders out there. It's just that this game had so much potential. It had so much going for it. An interesting premise, an entertaining story, these great cartoony graphics, good writing, funny quirky characters, and grade A voice acting. I just want to love this game so much, believe me. But the game just checks all the boxes of bad adventure design. It's tedious, it's frustrating, it's boring. Sometimes it feels like there's just more waiting than any interactivity of the game. I just wish the developers had a better look at the adventures of their competitors and did not feel forced to stretch out the game that much. Maybe something went wrong during the development and they had much more ambitious, which seems rather likely if you consider that there's a lot of really underutilized content as well. But who knows? I can just say I had rather played a 2-hour adventure than this 5 to 6 hours snooze fest. I think the game had the potential to be named right up there with other greats from LucasArts and Sierra, but that didn't happen and now I have to come to terms with the disappointment. Thanks for listening to my frustrations, and please don't be mad if you had a great experience back then playing that game. I really don't want to invalidate your opinion here. After all, fun is experienced very subjectively and everyone has a different idea of how to have a good time. And with that, see ya!